In my last video, I made a simple shelf to store small tools and hardware in my garage. In this video, I'll be building the trays to replace all these plastic ones. My main goal for the project is to keep costs down, so I'm only using scrap wood I have laying around. I have some pallet wood left over from a previous build, which I'll use for the frames, and I have these very thin sheets that I'll use for the bases. None of these boards have a straight edge, so first thing is to make one. I don't have a jointer or planer or table saw. If you did, you should definitely use those instead, but I'm going to use a homemade track saw, since that's what I have. Once I have a straight edge on all the pieces, I can cut them to their final width. Again, a table saw would be perfect, but to make do with my homemade track saw, I put together this simple jig. I have a perfect square piece right here that I'll put the straight edge of the pallet wood up against, with the right edge of my track saw guide up against this edge, and 2 scrap pieces of wood screwed down on the other side to put it in the exact position each time, which will make a cut at the right width. I can pretty quickly cut out all the pieces, and both edges should be perfectly parallel to each other too. Once that's done, I can cut them to their final length. I'm making 10 trays, so I need 40 pieces total, split into 2 different lengths. And again, I set up a simple jig to make repeatable right angle cuts with my track saw. Before gluing them up, I have one more step. I'd like to add some kind of dividers inside the tray, so I'm going to cut grooves on the inside pieces. I'm making them just the width of my saw blade, so it's easy to cut, and hopefully when I get there, I can find or make something thin enough to fit it. Once that's done, sanding the inside face, then I can put it together. I'm using my workbench as a right angle to glue and screw it together, and I put a little stop block on the leg to make it go quicker. The first one in, and I already broke a drill bit. Great. After putting the first one together, I realized the grooves were on the outside instead of on the inside where they should be, so I flipped it around. Okay, and mistake number 3 is that the front edge needs to be screwed up here, not down here. So after fixing that, now I can start batching these out. Also, I forgot to mention I did run out of pallet wood, so I have a few pieces of plywood that I'll use for the edges. With the frames done, now for the bottom. Since each tray is slightly different and not exactly square, I'll measure and cut each one out individually, opposed to batching out a bunch of identical ones. If you had a brad nailer, this is the time to use it. I don't, but I do have small nails and a hammer. Now for the dividers. I'm going to try and cut this pallet wood into thin strips. I have an idea for another track saw jig that might work for this. Okay, I'll skip ahead because this didn't work. My blade wasn't big enough to do it in one pass, and flipping it didn't work well. It also wasn't nearly thin enough. Time for plan B. I cut out this scrap piece of MDF and had the thought to try using my router to make a tongue and groove joint instead, which would look better than sanding it down to fit. And I think it worked really well. Now comes the fun part of the project, organizing everything. I cut out more dividers as needed as I went along. I also made grooves so they would fit together nicely. Some of the dividers needed to be hammered in to fit, so I didn't think any glue was really necessary. I'm also not going to put any finish on them. Once that's done, the last thing is some kind of handle, because right now I can put the shelf in, but taking them out, well, that's much harder. Remember the pallet wood I tried to cut for the dividers? Well, I'll make the handles out of them. I'm keeping it simple and just cutting out a trapezoid that I'll glue on. Here I'm using hot glue for the quick hold, but wood glue is where the real strength will come from once it dries. All done. I'm really happy with how this project turned out. I love the rustic aesthetic of pallet wood, and I'm also happy I was able to make this without buying any wood. I think it is a huge improvement from my previous storage system. Our work is just a reflection of our environments, and anything that makes my workshop just a little more beautiful will in turn be passed down to future projects. Thanks for watching.